It's a great honor, of course, to have two legends with us today. Dr. Eric Rubin, Editor-in-Chief for New England Journal of Medicine, and he's Professor of Immunology and Infectious Disease at Harvard School of Public Health. And also, of course, Dr. Valentin Fuster, Editor-in-Chief for JACC, Director of Mount Sinai Heart and Physician-in-Chief at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And of course, he's our mentor, and he's guiding us through the JACC journals. So also we have with us Dr. Mino Walsh, Deputy Editor for JACC Case Reports, Dr. David Fishman, Associate Editor for JACC Case Reports, Dr. Ricardo Fontes Carvalho, Associate Editor as well for JACC Case Reports, Dr. Rafa Vidal Perez, Associate Editor, Mrs. Justine Turco, Director of Publications, and we have the mentoring program is for the people from around the world that the last 6 months we have spent time to teach about publishing and reviewing and in general about mentoring. So this will be a great discussion. Thank you all for joining. And I will start the discussion with Dr. Rubin. Dr. Rubin, and the first topic to discuss is about COVID-19, unfortunately, and we have been discussing a lot about COVID-19 the last year, and leading New England and being an infectious disease expert must have been quite overwhelming for you. And also there was this ongoing discussion about keeping high quality and not being influenced by quantity. So what was your experience during the pandemic? How did you handle this huge number of manuscripts? And how was in general the balance between life and work during the pandemic?
Wow, so that's a lot. There's a lot there. Thanks. Let me start by saying hello to Dr. Fuster, who won't remember me, but he was Chief of Cardiology throughout my residency and fellowship when we were both at Mass General. It's been
hello. Thank you.
So it's been pretty much it's a somewhat difficult because I've been there for a little under 2 years. Almost all of that time has been through COVID-19. So it's what I know. It's the new normal, but it's kind of the standard normal for me. I had a few months of ramp up, and then the first cases hit. I started in September. We heard about the first cases in early January, and we were publishing on the topic by later January. I think it's been a very interesting experience as an infectious disease doctor. I mean, I took over at a time when there was at the biggest infectious disease crisis ever. So it really has been pretty dramatic and very interesting. It has been a lot of volume. At the peak, we were getting more than 200 manuscripts every day, 7 days a week. That's toned down now, but we're still at the level of getting about the same number, a few more COVID manuscripts every day than unrelated manuscripts. And through the course of that, surprisingly, the volume of non-COVID manuscripts has pretty much stayed the same. So that has been kind of crazy. It has really helped to not commute because our offices are still closed. So I get a couple hours extra a day to work. At the height of it, I have to say my work-life balance was not good at all. It's better now. I'm hoping that it will be better once this is completely over. But being at home has its advantages. I have the dog here next to me. I go out for walks many times a day as I can. And I haven't really taken any time off, but I'm planning to do that starting next month. So I think we're getting there. It's been a pretty crazy time.
Dr.
I'm sorry. Let me just.
Yes.
If I just address the quality question, and we can come back to this very briefly. I'll say, and I'm happy to follow up on this, that we are publishing. We have the same standards for publication that we we review everything and edit it the same way. We just do it a lot faster for many things. Where our standards have changed is that we're publishing the kinds of things that we wouldn't ordinarily publish. We publish lots of case reports, and I know you're a case report journal, but we don't usually publish many case reports. And we've published a lot of cohort studies that we wouldn't ordinarily publish, but because they were the best thing out there at the time. I'll stop there and let Dr. Fuster speak. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for being with you here today. I think it's an important issue. We are talking about mentoring. What a word, so important. Well, first of all, about COVID-19, the quantity of the papers received in JAC was overwhelming. And certainly we kept the standards, as Eric mentioned, in terms of the publication. But there was an observation. Overall, the quality was not of the kind of quality, overall I'm talking about, that we are used to. And this for us was an alarm system which actually is that perhaps young people are really very much pushed to publish. And we have certainly three manifestations of that in JAC. The first one is that the number of studies that are coming from young people that are sub-studies of a main study. This is increasing. The second is how papers are split today on a subject and is divided in 1, 2, 3 papers. And that the need for to expedite the papers that come to the journal. The reason I'm saying this to you is because these are manifestations that there is a push for publication to publish by the young people. And actually in the COVID, this became so obvious with so many papers, and actually, as I said, not necessarily they were of the quality that we wanted. I think the question that comes to mind by saying this is, what can we do for the young people? Should we push to publish so much, or should we look at less publications but much more high quality? And this is a question that really is very important today.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rubin, any comments or?
You know, I love the fact that you jump right to mentoring, which is so important to all of us. And of course, our topic today. It's been an unusual time for everyone. And I don't think that we as journal editors are any different. For trainees, they had this unusual experience of shifting all their work to COVID-19. That's burden that's particularly fallen on and people with ICU experience, like the cardiology fellows, and that is, I think, warped a bit the usual protocols for doing everything. They've also, as Dr. Fuster said, changed the standards that people are learning, and I do have some fear about that. We still embrace the most rigorous forms of research, and observational studies are simply not that rigorous. Sometimes they're all we've got, and we have been publishing those because there is nothing else, and because we felt that physicians who are caring for these patients really needed help. I know that when I've been on the infectious disease service over the last year, we just didn't know what to do, and some guidance was better than no guidance. However, I think we continue to see these kinds of studies being done, collecting retrospective case series, et cetera, that aren't helping us understand where to go next. So I totally share the concerns about the sort of longer term effects and what we're teaching people to do.
So, yes,
hey, Julia, I have a question for both the editors. So, Dr. Rubin, it's really nice to meet you. I'm a fan. I canceled patients to be on this call, and I think I would like to hear from you and Dr. Fuster, and I hope our trainees will as well. Why did you become editor? That's a daunting responsibility. the inbox is never empty. And, you know, how did you decide with your other professional responsibilities that you wanted to be editor-in-chief for both you and for Dr. Fuster?
Why don't I start? And I think you're going to get very different answers, because I think we come from very different career trajectories. I'm a basic scientist. I mean, I've always done clinical work throughout my career, but I run a basic science lab. The only patients I publish about have 4 feet and are about 10 grams in weight. So this wasn't the logical next step. I'd been an associate editor and a deputy editor and a section editor at various basic science journals. In about 2012, I think, I became an associate editor at the New England Journal, which was a big change and really was a big learning experience, because I had to learn about how to do rigorous clinical trials. Yeah, I'm hardly an expert, but I kind of know the fundamentals at this point. But when the opportunity came to become editor-in-chief, 2 things really appealed to me. The first is the impact that one can have at a major medical journal like ours, like JACC. That patients' care is changed the day that you publish these, that you publish important studies. And it's not a passive process. As your fellows have undoubtedly seen, we feel like we make a big contribution to getting the message out there, making sure it's rigorous and getting the message out there in a way that will positively affect patients and allow physicians to make the best decisions, not just get something out there because it's exciting or controversial. So that was appealing. It's also intellectually amazing. Our editorial meetings, we have 2-3 in-person meetings a week discussing what's been submitted, are great. They're like the world's best medical journal club, because we're considering articles that are really, really good. Even the ones that don't make it, if they've made it through the filters to make it to the editorial meeting, they're great. They're being presented by an expert in the area. It's an incredible learning experience 3 times a week. It's amazing. I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by fantastic, incredibly bright, enthusiastic people who feel like what they're doing is important. So I think there have been some sacrifices, particularly this year. Thus far, I'd say they're worth it. The other thing is that I'm kind of not giving up anything. So I still have my lab. It's still just as active as before. So I kind of can have my cake and eat it too right now. We'll see how long I can sustain that for. Thanks for the question.
Mary, I am an editor by accident. In fact, there was a deadline as to be an editor of JACC, and I didn't have any idea. But I am a product of mentoring, and I'm mentoring fellows all the time. So the fellows got into my office, and they said, "Do you know there is a deadline to be an editor of JACC?" And I said, "When is the deadline?" They say, "In 5 days." And I said, "Thank you very much, but I'm not interested." Well, this didn't finish when others, Jagad Narul and other people, said, "You need to do it because you are so involved with young people that you can have an influence." So I have to tell you, I wrote to apply, and I said a couple of pages of what I would do. I sent it in on a Sunday. The deadline was on a Monday, and they called me for the interview, and I just became editor. Now, the question is, once you are editor and you didn't look for that job, what can you do that you think is meaningful? And this has been my life, you know. I do, as you know, a lot of podcasts and trying to get into people and so forth, which is somewhat out of the journal. But I just want to emphasize, Mary, I am an editor by accident, not because I was looking forward. But I am enjoying it. And you say, what are you doing with all the rest? Well, you know, the day, I think, got prolonged.
So talking about mentoring and the mentors that you both had and during your career, and actually link it to the question by Mino. Do you remember the characteristics of the best mentors that you had in your career pathway that influenced you practically to, you know, to move towards this direction?
Are you asking me, Julia?
Yes, let's start with
Yeah.
you, Dr. Fuster, and then Dr. Ruby.
Well, let me tell you about mentorship. It has to be looked within a context. First of all, in these young people who are lucky to get into fellowship programs and universities, I ask three things. First, to be creative. And to be creative is not only to write papers, maybe creative on education and something else. The second issue is to be satisfied into what you do. And the third is to work as a team person. During the be satisfied is to really get self-esteem. There are three aspects. The first, you have to work hard. The second, you have to be resilient and accept that life are bumps in the road and you have to be persistent. But most importantly, you have to invest into your talent. This is critically where the mentor comes in. We all think who we are, but we don't know enough about ourselves. So to me, the mentor is the person who discovers what your talent is, and you then make the best investment. And such a person may be two people. One is general in your life, scientific life or academic life or clinical life, and the other may be related to a project or projects that you are doing. You need to have a chemistry. That is to know that that mentor is going to jump into the ocean if it is necessary for you. And then the mentors not only know who you are, but they go into the syndrome of the umbrella. The syndrome of the umbrella is you open an umbrella slowly, you start very, very focused on something very focused, and you open up slowly up. And that a mentor is absolutely critical. And then a mentor tells you how to be resilient. The mentor tells you when you fail, he's there. When you don't fail, he's there too. So I just want to point out that mentorship is absolutely critical, and the fact that I am obsessive about the word mentorship, this is part of my life, is because I am a product of the best mentors that one can have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Fuster. Dr. Rubin?
So I think that's very nicely put. I'd add that there are kind of two different pieces, at least in my life. There's mentorship, which has all of the characteristics that Dr. Fuster mentioned. The fact that you have someone who invests in you and is invested in your success and invested in figuring out what success is going to look like for you rather than something in their minds. But also there's the role model aspect of it. And I think many role models have had a huge influence on my life. I don't think I had many plans in my life, other than my father told me when I was growing up that he didn't care what I became when I grew up, just as long as I went to medical school. So I knew that I had to go to medical school, but beyond that, it was a bunch of lucky accidents, meeting people who had a tremendous influence on me. Let me give you, and it's not necessarily because of everything they were, but it could all, in many cases, it was some aspect, and I think it continues today. If I see someone who runs a great meeting, I think, wow, they run a great meeting. I wish I could do that. What is it that's really good about what they're doing? But going back, I mean, I think there were larger influences. There were people in medicine who really impressed me. Let me just, I will mention, for example, that Dr. Fuster used to have Fuster rounds when he was chief of cardiology, is this amazing physical diagnostician, and would walk into a room shake hands with someone, glance at their hands and say, they have aortic insufficiency. And, you know, to those of us who were residents at the time, we thought he looked at the patient's chart, but in fact, he hadn't. You know, he was that good. My biggest influence example, I think, was the very first day I became an intern. My attending was a guy named Mort Schwartz, who's one of the founders of infectious disease, the late Mort Schwartz. And he was the best doctor I've ever seen, and probably the best human being that I've ever met. A humble, incredibly knowledgeable, but humble guy. And it was in that first week of internship, I decided I wanted to do infectious disease because I wanted to be even a little bit like Mort. And I think that's continued throughout my career. And to this day, I find people whose qualities I just love. And it can be in medicine, in publishing, in science, or in life in general.
I'd like to make a comment here, if I may, and again, may serve the purpose of this meeting this morning. I wanted to be a tennis player, and I flunked a subject on a summer. I was age 16, and my father said, "You're going to study this summer. You will not play 5 hours a day as you used to do." So it arrived September, and I had to, you know, there is the so-called Orange Bowl, which is the Davis Cup for young people in Miami. And they said, you know, you didn't play this summer, the manager told me, so you have to play now with 3 other people, but you will win. I lost. I stopped playing tennis that day. Then I became, over a period of some degree of depression, because I didn't know what to do. But the doctor that was better known in the country was the Dr. Ferreras Valentin, who wrote the standard book in Spanish in medicine, got me into his office one day and says, "You will be a great physician." I said, "But how in the world can you say that?" Says, "I have been observing you over the years in this tennis club." So I became a physician because the person who told me. But there is more. He got a heart attack at age 42. And he said, "I know most of medicine, but not so much of cardiology. I want you to be a cardiologist." So I became a cardiologist. But there is more. He sent me every summer to a different place. Then basic science was histopathology, electron microscopy. And I ended up second year in Liverpool working with Dr. Harold Sheehan, a fantastic pathologist, who asked me every day to see slides with him. And the first day, I look at the slide under the microscope, and he said, "You absolutely know nothing. You should look at the slide first at high without a microscope." The next day, or about a week later, let's say, there was a slide that we saw nothing, looking at the slide, nothing on the microscope, and he said, "You need electron microscopy." A few days later, this was a platelet clot. And I said, "Where this comes from a patient with a heart attack?" And I said, "And what the clot has to do with the heart attack? Is the cause or the consequence?" This was a great debate in the early 1960s. And he said, very in a humble way, "I don't know, but we're going to write the thesis about this." Interestingly, as a foreigner, when I was there, you know, I was a student, nobody paid attention to me. It was a tennis tournament, and after 5 years, I got the racket again, and I won everybody. So I became a hero there. And on top, he told me to do the thesis, so he wrote to Edinburgh, and I went to Edinburgh to do my thesis, just as a great tennis player, which I didn't play for 5 years, and then as somebody who he decided I should work on platelets and heart attacks. And I started working with the platelets, and then I went into atherosclerotic disease, etc. In life, you have to take advantage from time to time to somebody you trust. And if you trust, jump into the ocean. Don't think twice.
That's a great
Okay,
advice.
but can I ask a follow-up question? Did you look at the chart? Did you really see Quincy's pulse when you shook hands with that guy?
Look, you know what, Eric? I am doing this still today, twice a week. They present an unknown to me, and I go to the bedside, and my point is to show that how important is the clinical examination. And I do this, I have done this, for the last 25 years, and I do this twice a week. And uh, no, certainly I don't look at any chart. I don't remember even to cross my mind. But it's a very important issue, and let me tell you why. Today, as you know, physiology doesn't exist anymore. Pathophysiology. You are molecular level, basic science, and so forth. And the pathophysiology is at the bedside. How the left side of the heart works compared with the right side with the lungs in the middle. Where do you read this? Nowhere. Has to be in front of the patient. So what I do is I try to teach a subject that is not anymore fashionable in medical schools, which is physiology or pathophysiology.
So very interesting, and thank you very much for that. So we have few questions from the audience, if I may ask. So the first question from Dr. Fontes Carvalho from Portugal. Practically, sometimes the journals may receive papers, that it is a bilateral approach. There is equal responsibility of the authors to submit the best of the data, and also how the journal, as editors, can we ensure the quality and practically the accuracy of what is being published. And I'm asking this because also I at the AHA last year, I heard an interesting lecture. I think it was by Dr. Bob Harrington, that he said that the journals are not police, but there is a mutual trust. So what are your thoughts about that? And I was wondering if I could start from Dr. Rubin and then Dr. Fuster.
So this is constantly a discussion for us because we often get manuscripts that are, for example, could be too good to be true, or we have complaints from readers saying these data can't possibly be true. But I think that the question is absolutely correct. We have a very high element of trust, and that's because we never see the primary data. If you think about a large randomized clinical trial, there's an army of statisticians who work on that for months in order to come up with an answer. It's not possible for a reviewer, even for our statistical reviewers who are putting in a substantial amount of time, to reproduce that work and figure out what and arrive at their conclusions. And so we can do a pretty good job, I think, of judging whether or not whether or not the rules that they set for themselves make sense, and whether they stuck to their rules. What we're not so good at doing at figuring out is fabrication. It's a very rare event, I have to say. And it's rare because, for one thing, we do reject papers where we are just suspicious, we just aren't comfortable that we're fine, let them publish elsewhere, but we aren't comfortable putting out a message like that. And because it's still relatively rare at the very highest levels. But there are many cases. We were subject to one this past year of data that was clearly fabricated in retrospect. And we have tried to make better systems to deal with it, but it can happen. But I have to say, overall, it's extraordinarily rare for us to find, or even to think, that something was not done, was made up. There are certainly many other quality issues, but we're better at handling those. The journal editors, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, has a set of protocols for review, but they do say specifically what you said, which is we aren't police. We can't go and check. We can't go and check original data. We do have a large element of trust.
Yeah, my comment is exactly the same. Trust is the word. We have found that addressing the quality of the paper, we just became convinced it is critical. Each paper has to be looked by the statisticians. They pick up things that sometimes the reviewer do not. And then to pay a lot of attention to the figures. These are two aspects that I think are very critical, but I think that trust is the name of the game. Few cases we had that things were not smooth, sometimes because somebody tells you to look in detail a paper, somebody who worked with the individual. There are many ways that one gets into it, some papers, which I think is an exception, that something was wrong. But in general, I would agree completely with Dr. Rubin. Trust is the word.
Thank you so much. Very interesting again. And now the next question coming from Dr. Nadira Hamid from Columbia is, what are your thoughts on the clinical trial design and conduct and how it will change in the post-COVID era? Is research going to change? Are we going back to normal to see a lot of more original research? We had also a session, nice session at the AC21 with Dr. Fuster discussing about how the quality of research is going to change after COVID. So what are your thoughts? And I will start with Dr. Fuster and of course then Dr. Rubin.
Well, first of all, something is happening, certainly in the cardiovascular field, and I think in other fields, is the number of original papers that we publish of high quality is decreasing. In fact, I did a survey very recently of the number of papers published by a number of journals with high impact 10 years ago and now, and the number has significantly decreased. And the question is why? And I think science has advanced so much that today is becoming much more critical from every point of view to have a paper published that contributes further to what we have learned. This is a reality before COVID and after COVID. I don't think this is changing. I think we have to, and I really like to hear from Dr. Rubin, I think we have to pay more and more attention to papers that integrate knowledge, reviews, etc. Why? Because the science is so complex. And today, what I see is we have to pay much more attention in trying to pull together what is most recent that can be clearly integrated. And I think one of the aspects that I found quite interesting was the central figure that we designed for JAC. We found at the beginning the investigators didn't want to have a central figure. And then we realized that probably they didn't know exactly where their subject was within the whole context. Now everybody wants a central figure. And it's just trying to tell you that we have to integrate our knowledge in some way that can percolate to people and people to understand. And I think there is a decrease in the original articles, and I think it should be an increase on integrated articles, reviews, and so forth.
That's a very interesting point, and I think that as things become more sophisticated, it gets increasingly difficult to communicate those messages to clinicians. We have published more toward the translational side, and those articles can be very difficult. And speaking as a basic scientist, basic science articles are all over the place. There's no standard way of telling a story. I think that's probably a weakness where in clinical investigation, I think people have come up with a way of being more methodically telling a story, but it hasn't really sunk down, and that makes it very difficult to tell a story. And I think that the idea of framing stories in a way that with reviews, we have a section called Clinical Implications of Basic Research, for example, that kind of thing really is a very good idea. The other thing I'd add, and again, this is from my basic science perspective, is that giant randomized clinical trials are critical to what we do. They're the gold standard, but they're kind of anachronistic in a way. You think they're really set up to answer one question. They're very, very expensive. They can take thousands and thousands of patients in many years. And at the end, you have the answer to that question, and then suggestions as to possibly other things that are not all that reliable. It doesn't seem like a sustainable way of doing, of asking questions in research. And I hope that we get to see more innovative trial designs, adaptive trial designs and such. We're seeing some of that actually in COVID. We've seen, for example, these continuing adaptive studies like the big recovery trial going on in the UK, where many things can be tested. To some extent, the active trials that the NIH has been sponsoring, where you can take the same platform and ask different questions and change up those questions on the fly a bit. Now, those have their issues. And we have a bit of a fight with our statisticians over whether or not what they're doing is acceptable. But they certainly are very much more efficient, a more efficient way of learning things. And I think we need to be getting to a point where we can learn more in shorter times for less money than we're doing right now.
So following this question, Dr. Rubin, I know that you said that we have a lot of randomized control trials and a lot of prospective studies with thousands of patients. There are some rare diseases, or of course, like pediatric patients or even congenital. There are some orphan fields, as our colleague Dr. Neha Bansal asked. Do you feel that you have a balance of 50-50 in what you publish, or for example, you give space to these entities that they worth more development? So how do you prioritize also that these researchers that they will have, that the visibility that they deserve to get equal funding?
So a great question. We don't have any preset numbers. We don't decide, here's the number of cardiology papers we're going to take, here are the number of orphan diseases that we're going to take, anything like that. But we are interested in taking the best possible study that can be done given the question. The best possible studies for post-MI care are going to be huge RCTs, because the questions that are being asked are usually things that are going to have small effect sizes. And there's no other way to ask that question. And so small RCTs asking about what kind of anticoagulation is appropriate after an MI that's not going to make it for us, because they're not going to give us a convincing answer. On the other hand, if you have spinal muscular atrophy, a genetic disease of children, how many cases can you collect? You're never going to do an RCT. It may not even be ethical to do an RCT in kids who are going to die of this disease and be severely disabled during that time. So we published studies using 1, 2, 3 patients in that disease. We've published 3 of them actually over the last couple of years, because there's some interesting approaches to that disease. And so that's the best kind of study one can do for that. So I think we're looking to not, although we tend to be an RCT journal, I don't think of us as that. I think we're thinking about what's the highest quality information you can learn given the question that you're asking.
Yeah, I have not a different view, but certainly a view from a journal that is very much clinical, I would say, and translational. Today, science is so integrated that when I picked up into the journal, and the journal is cardiovascular disease, I said, well, this is fine. But what about the brain, cognitive function? It depends a lot from the circulation. And what about surgery? We say, well, there are journals on cardiac surgery. How can you not to talk about surgery when you have a lot of articles of structural heart disease? And how you don't get into pediatrics. So what we did with the journal is to open up, again, like an umbrella, because this is all integrated. So I would say that if you pick up JAK today, any of the issues, you will see, you don't be surprised that you have congenital heart disease there, and don't be surprised you have the follow-up of a type of a surgical procedure, which is quite peculiar, for example, but important in structural disease. And now we have more and more papers on cognitive function as they are related to risk factor profile that affect the large arteries. So, you know, in a matter of fact, what I'm saying to you that we are now opening up, but we always try to integrate whatever I'm saying with the main subject. And this is a change, is a change. I'd like to ask Dr. Rubin a question. Dr. Rubin, about the physician of the future. I have been thinking a lot about it. I don't know if my granddaughter or my grandson would like to be doctors, but I certainly think about it. And let me ask you, you know, I see the great doctor of the future will not be the great diagnostician or the great therapist, but I think will be somebody who will be able to integrate in front of the patient what comes from the environment, what comes from genetics, what comes from pharmacogenetics and pharmacology, and being able to come up with a decision. And my question to you is, I am worried. And you know what I'm worried about? That people will begin to use all these small computers in trying to get an answer when in fact there is a lot of judgment on all these different aspects that will make the physician of the future. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, on one hand, we are going to be on a doctor who is going to be an integrator from basic science to clinical application. On the other hand, I really am very worried, or what I see today so often, people are punching computers and giving you answers which are not integrated with anything. So I'd like to know your view about it.
I think you really, you know, I point up a conundrum, which is doctors of the future, and I'd say doctors of today, are not the huge repositories of knowledge that they once were. We're not creating more Schwartzes. We're not creating a lot of, I apologize for valid heat posters. We can do everything and know everything. Because the information is out there. So there are a lot of facts. And as you say, you can sit down at the bedside with your iPhone and look up the differential diagnosis for anything. And you know, the data that are out there are getting pretty good. They're not so bad. But what you can't substitute, what the physician's role is using their judgment, trying to take all that information. So I do think that we have to have doctors who are facile with retrieving information. That's going to continue to be important. The growth of medical knowledge is just so rapid. But I think that as some medical schools have gone to, we should be teaching people how to think how to access that information and how to think rather than just put down a scorecard. One of the things that we face, and I'm sure you have as well, Dr. Fuster, is the increasing growth of artificial intelligence. in medical research, and that we get more and more submissions all the time, including AI approaches. And I guess I don't really think of AI as a substitute for a doctor. It's a fantastic tool, and it's possible that AI is going to be able to take data that we and make conclusions, data that we can't make sense of, and draw conclusions from it. From monitoring over several weeks someone's watch, smartwatch, maybe they'll be able to diagnose syndromes that we would never be able, that an individual physician could never see. And I think that would be fantastic and a big addition. But I don't see the judgment piece of it. And in fact, I think that you and many of the people on this call have seen the transitions that occur during training when you have increasing responsibility for decision making. Coming up with a differential diagnosis is a great skill. It's something you learn in medical school. It's something you learn early in residency. But deciding what you're going to pursue and what action you're going to take, that's very difficult. And that isn't something that's up to date. It's really something that requires having spent time with patients, getting an idea of who's sick and who's not, for example. That sort of thing has to be part of a good doctor's DNA. I don't think that's going to change in the near future.
I like your answer. Absolutely.
And so that's.
Can I turn that question around? Is that okay?
Please do. Yes.
So, as medicine is changing, and as your grandchildren may have a very different practice from yours, what will you regret? What are your grandchildren going to miss out on?
Excuse me, can you, I'd like to understand the question better. I'm sorry, I think I missed the last part.
So what do you think what do you regret? What do you think that your grandchildren are going to miss out on that you got from the medicine the way that it's always been practiced?
Well, first of all, I am one of those optimistic people who feel what Teilhard de Chardin said, the point omega, which is life goes for a better rather than for worse. So when I think about my grandchildren in medicine, trying to answer your question, there are lots of clouds that I can have in front of me now, but I try to disperse them, saying, in a way, probably medicine will be better practice. Maybe medicine will reach people who today cannot afford and will be much more fair to everybody. And there are aspects that I see positive. Now, the thing that worries me, frankly, Dr. Rubin, is that there's one aspect of medicine that is quite important, and that is the emotional and insight of the patient. This is something that is difficult to quantify, and is 50% of every patient that we see today, is where this individual comes from. What is the perception of the illness of this individual? And this aspect that is so important, I don't think will be any computer in the world that will be able to grasp. And I'm worried that our grandchildren, maybe, when they are doctors, they will be surrounded by machines and things. And that particular aspect, it is the meaning of our lives and how we manifest ourselves and how we perceive who we are, may be losing track. That's my main problem. But in terms of how medicine is going to be practiced, I feel optimistic.
Thanks, that's a terrific answer.
Thank you so much, both. And reaching actually the end of this session, I will try to merge 3 questions into one. So I have a question, what is your advice to a fellow, to someone who is starting now their career? Because if we think about it, it can be overwhelming. The number one question is to publish original research, to do basic science that is missing, or to start writing reviews. Let's say to choose the very difficult pathway, or let's say to start from most conventional way. The other one is, for example, how you would strengthen a fellow to be competitive. Would you ask them to be more creative and innovative, or again, to look at the more conservative way? So I was wondering, shall I start from Dr. Rubin and then go to Dr. Fuster?
Thanks. I'm going to hark back to what Dr. Fuster said before, which is there's part of mentoring is figuring out what is a person, what's right for that person, what are they good at, and what do they like, and what will give them a rewarding experience in life. And so I think there are many paths to being successful, many paths. In the end, I think you want to be able to make a contribution. And what's the best way you can make that contribution? For me, a lot of it is being good at something rather than being good at everything. If you are trying to make an academic career, for example, you want to be known for a specific contribution. So you want to have enough focus so that you increase your value. If you want to work in international health, it may be that being a great doctor is enough for you, or having an idea of health economics, so that microeconomics, so that you can figure out how best to support a local health clinic. As I said, there are many ways to do it. But I think that all of them involve identifying your strengths, your desires, and figure out what it is that you uniquely can bring to medicine.
Yeah, I actually agree completely. I would call success fulfillment, not the place that you occupy in society, which may last 3 days. So fulfillment means I am who I am. This is my talent. I'm using my talent the best I can. And certainly all of you who are here today, I'm sure, have some sense of creativity. And at the very end, I think what you will say is, not only I have done what I am supposed to do with all the equipment that I have, but at the same time, I have been a contributor to society or to your family, to wherever it is, but somehow you feel I have done what I should do and I have created what I have created. So I think it's very important to know who you are. We are going around this all the time, and how important mentors are to tell you who in the world you are, invest there, and be fulfilled and create.
Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, I think we could go on and on and on for hours like this, but we reached the end of the session. Any final comments? Because for our 40 people, and of course the extended editorial board, about mentoring or about publishing or about life in general?
We have a full-time fellowship program at the journal. We have 3 or 4 fellows every year who come and spend a year, and it's one of the most gratifying things that we all do. And I wish we did a session like this for them. So a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe what I will say is to the young people, listen more than talking. It's very important that we get out of ourselves and just listen. We have to be humble. And to being humble, you learn much more than not being. So this is my last comment.
Thank you so much, all of you. Really grateful for your time, for your energy, and it was amazing to learn from you and your experience. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, Dr. Rubin, Dr. Fuster. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And Dr. Rubin, it has been an honor for me to be participating with you in this session. Thank you.
Oh, the honor is mine. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.